Hello, welcome back to our latest We Are Sunderland briefing, our first briefing video of 2025. And what a way to start the year it was for Sunderland with that win over Sheffield United at the Stadium of Light on New Year's Day. Scott was there, so we'll get to that, obviously. And we're going to have a look inevitably ahead to the January transfer window. The window's now open. Regis Le Bris has been pretty open, really, about what Sunderland want and what the month could bring. So we'll get to that and talk at length about who might be coming, who might be going. Thanks, as ever, a new year, but the same backers, the Fans Museum and Cost Specs Opticians. Really grateful to both of those for the support. And thanks to you for watching and getting in touch and subscribing. If you don't subscribe to the channel, then just tap that button below. If you're listening on your podcast platforms, then rate and review on there as well. So we'll get to transfers because I'm sure that is what will dominate much of the talk in the weeks to come. But we've got to start with that win last night, Scott. We're recording this on Thursday afternoon. Sunderland win, beat Sheffield United 2-1 at the Stadium of Light last night. Massive win in isolation, but even more so after the drop points and frustration of Stoke and Blackburn. It felt important before the game, didn't it, Scott? It felt massive after it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it was a bad Christmas, was it? Performance-wise, the games at Blackburn and Stoke weren't dreadful, but obviously to concede late in both of them and to only take 1 point from those two games was a big disappointment. Then obviously you have Burnley and Leeds failing to win earlier in the day on Wednesday. So yeah, going into that game on Wednesday night, it felt like, a big moment in Sunderland's season. Could they get a win against, undoubtedly one of the better teams in the league, one of their promotion rivals, and close that gap on the top two? Or were we going to be talking about 2 points from 9 over Christmas, 1 point from 9 over Christmas, and all of a sudden you're on the back foot? Well, it was clearly the former of those, wasn't it? Really, I thought it was a good game, full stop, but really good performance from Sunderland. Much better, I thought, in attack. We can get to the formation, but the tweak that Le Bris did playing the two up front definitely worked. And I think that's more kudos to him. We've seen already on a number of occasions this season, he's a manager who, thinks tactically, isn't afraid to make tweaks, isn't afraid to try things. That definitely worked for Sunderland. And then in the second half, when Sheffield United were kind of knocking on the door and trying to get back into it, Sunderland defended really, really well. Obviously, 2 massive saves in the game from Patterson, including obviously the penalty save. And yeah, just, a good night all round, a really positive result against one of the best teams in the league.
Le Bris's tweak there, that's bold, isn't it? Because how many times, I remember sitting there with Mike Dodds a couple of times last year, and probably the most high-profile example is Pep Guardiola overthinking big games, maybe making changes, random changes that you would deem not necessary for big games. If that backfires last night and you get beat to a rival, having tinkered and tweaked to a formation that you've never played or played in small parts this season, then Le Bris has got questions to answer. It's a bold move, isn't it, for a game of that importance?
It is, but I think it speaks to Le Bris's coaching ability. Now, funny enough, we've got a piece going up on the site in about an hour and a half's time, where I've kind of talked around this. And we're in an era now where, for me, an awful lot of managers, an awful lot of head coaches, and we can all think of the high-profile examples in the Premier League, Amorim, Postecoglou. This is the way I coach. This is what I do. This is my formation. This is how I set my teams up. This is how I get my team to play. Come hell or high water, that's not changing. Well, for me, surely part of the art of being a good head coach is to be able to say, well, okay, that's the way I would ideally like to play. But actually, with this group of players, or for this game, because of the way the opposition's going to set up, actually, I don't think that's necessarily the best way to go. So we'll try this. We'll do this. Change it in game. Le Bris already, we've seen, I think, is really good at that. And listening to him after the game, where he talked about the fact that Sheffield United play an awful lot of their game down the middle, so he wanted Sunderland to have numerically be able to match them there. The fact that Sheffield United do give you a chance to get in behind them, so he wanted that pace up top. He wanted the two players who could get in behind the centre halves. Just listening to him explain why he'd made these changes, you're thinking, do you know what? That's a really astute tactician there. And it clearly worked. It worked in terms of getting Sunderland the result. I also thought it worked in terms of Mayenda clearly looked much more comfortable playing through the middle than being stuck out on the left as he has been in the last month or so. And I also thought Isidore looked better with someone else to take the load off him. And so he wasn't the only out ball, if you like. He wasn't having to do all of the donkey work. I thought it helped both of them. Now, as Le Bris then also said, look, don't run away with this and think, right, that's the attacking problem solved. We'll play two up front every week. That's the end of it. Clearly there will be games where that just doesn't work. And I suspect Sunday at home to Portsmouth, given that Portsmouth will almost certainly come and initially at least look to sit in and let Sunderland have the ball, a 4-4-2 probably won't be the way to go. And I'd be surprised if it's the way that Le Bris sets them up at the weekend. But he's shown that there's games where it can work, and he's shown that he's willing to try it.
Going into the New Year's Day fixture, Sunderland was 7 points off the top and 7 points ahead of 7th place. And I said to Le Bris in his press conference the day before the game, what is the not the priority, but what's, I guess, at the forefront of your thinking now? Catching those above or making sure you keep those behind at bay? Now, his answer was pretty obvious for a manager. I'm not thinking that far ahead. I'm only thinking of the games to come. But it did feel last night, had Sunderland lost, then the top two was suddenly, and this was before we knew that Leeds and Burnley had dropped points. So maybe the point doesn't stand. But certainly the day before going into the game, it felt like had Sunderland lost on the back of the drop points against Blackburn and Stoke, like you say, it wasn't disastrous, but points were dropped. You began to feel like the top two were getting away from them for a bit. Now, anything but.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. Obviously, close within 2 points of both Sheffield United and Burnley, who are currently sitting second and third. And I think it speaks as well to what we've been saying all season, that it doesn't feel like a league where someone's going to suddenly run away and be that much better. We've seen Leeds, we've seen Sheffield United, we've seen Burnley. Yes, they will win games, clearly, but I don't think any of those sides at the minute has the look of a team that's going to win 6, 7, 8 on the bounce and become uncatchable. I still think Leeds are probably the best team. I still think with their attacking firepower, they're maybe the ones who could potentially go on that kind of a run, but they haven't done it so far, and they definitely have defensive questions to ask Leeds. So, as long as Sunderland can stay within 2 or 3 points of the teams in and around them and above them, they're going to have every chance in the remainder of this season. They really are. And like you say, it was a big day yesterday for just keeping that gap at a very manageable size.
And when you look at the month ahead, the fixtures are running across the bottom there. Portsmouth home this weekend, then Stoke at home in the FA Cup, Stoke again, third time in a month.
I think you're completing the hat-trick as well, aren't you?
I am getting the Stoke hat-trick, and I'll have seen a different manager in charge of Stoke on every occasion.
That's incredible, isn't it?
He would play for 4 weeks, yeah. And there will be a new manager in charge of Plymouth by the time they head to the Stadium of Light at the end of January as well. Wedged in between there's Derby away and Burnley away. That's clearly the game, isn't it, when you look at the January fixtures? Take that Burnley game out of it, and that's a really presentable run of games, I think, for Sunderland. The month may well hinge on, obviously, on the back of Sheffield United. Clearly, that's a great start, but just of the remaining fixtures, it probably looks like it could hinge on that trip to Turf Moor.
Yes, although in some ways, I would flip it and say I think it kind of hinges a little bit on this Sunday, because I think if Sunderland beat Portsmouth and have suddenly taken 6 from 6 in those 2 home games, then I hate the idea of Burnley being a free hit. It's not a free hit, clearly. It's a massive game between the two sides. But whatever happens in that game, I don't think would feel as damaging if Sunderland are going into it on the back of 2 successive home wins and being certainly no more than 2 points behind Burnley at kickoff. So I think Sunday's a big game, because I think if you win Sunday, then that really has been a great week. And like I say, the FA Cup game, we'll get that, we'll get to that when we get round to it. That will be a whole host of changes. It'll be a non-event, won't it? Let's be brutally honest about it.
Tickets are still available for Sunderland.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Follow our coverage on We Are Sunderland. But then Burnley, yeah, clearly a massive game. But like I say, I don't think if Sunderland had beaten Portsmouth, then I don't think whatever happens in that Burnley game is damaging, and it becomes a real opportunity to go above them, doesn't it?
And the other thing about Burnley, clearly they're strong, but there's nothing to fear there. Sunderland have beaten them already this season. The drop points against a Stoke team that I know they beat Sunderland the other day, but they look decidedly average throughout the game, really.
Yeah, and they had that. I was at the goalless draw that they had with Borough, which was the day you were at Stoke, I think, wasn't
Stoke,
it?
yeah.
And Burnley were what Burnley are. Very solid, very hard to break down, but they don't have a superb technician or a creative genius who's going to unlock you. They're not going to score many goals. I think Josh Brown is the leading scorer, isn't he? Which pretty much says it all, really. You know what I mean? So, Sunderland have nothing to fear by going there. But as I keep coming back to, if they're going there having off the back of 2 successive league wins, then I think they're in a really strong position.
The wise money could be on a 0-0 there, like, couldn't it?
Game
when you look at the team.
Friday night 0-0. Yeah. Beautiful.
What will the squad look like by then and by the end of the month? Obviously, the window's open now. And Le Bris has been pretty open in the last few weeks. If you ask Le Bris a direct, straight question about something, he'll tend to give you a straight answer. So a few weeks ago, you asked him about, I think it was Nazara Hussain, Abdullah Bart and Adil Al-Shish. This was before Al-Shish kind of re-emerged in the scene. And he said then, yeah, there's every chance those players could go. A few weeks ago, I said to him, is it the forward areas you want to strengthen? Yeah. And then at his press conference ahead of the New Year's Day game, are you interested in Premier League loans? Yes, absolutely. Now, I know there's nothing absolutely groundbreaking there, but how many press conferences have we sat in where managers will say, I don't want to get drawn into specifics of positions, or, we'll assess every market. We're keeping our options open. Piece by piece, Le Bris has given us a pretty clear view, really, of what Sunderland are hoping to do this month.
Yeah, and I think, so there's a few things in this, isn't there? So I think we would all agree that Sunderland are not going to go in for massive, major surgery in January. A, because it's always hard to do that in January, whatever league you're in, whatever club you're at. And B, because as we've seen, this isn't a squad with gaping holes in very obvious areas. Now, that's not to say that there's not weaker areas, and there clearly are. And very obviously, the main one is attack. It has been all season. Yes, we've talked about how well things looked last night, and Mayenda's looked good playing through the middle. Isadore's obviously done well. He scored at times. He's then had periods where he hasn't been hitting the net. But I think the fact that Aaron Connolly has barely kicked a ball, had Connolly come in, massively hit the ground running, scored a load of goals, made himself undroppable, then that's a different conversation. Clearly, that hasn't happened. So I think you're looking at it thinking, Sunderland could definitely do with another attacking option between now and the end of the season. Are they going to go and spend 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 million pound on a ready-made Championship striker? No.
Tom Cannon.
Tom Cannon say almost certainly no. Are they going to go and sign a young kid, in the model of what we've seen? Well, possibly. But I think if they do that, there'll be an acceptance that it's for the future rather than to help in the second half of the season. So if you're then wanting someone who can help in the second half of the season, I think you're already at the point where really the box you're looking at is Premier League loans. And, it's early days in the window. Clearly, we're going off a bit of gossip and all of that. But little bits and bobs of what you hear suggest that actually there could well be 3, 4, 5 Premier League forwards potentially available this month for Championship loan moves. And I think Sunderland will be banging the equation for them. And I think they're an attractive option because, as we've seen, they don't have a nailed-on number 9 who's going to start every game between now and the end of this. You look at, say, Borough just down the road. Well, they've got Emmanuel Latalath. They've got Tommy Conway. If you're a Premier League youngster, you're not going to go to Borough, I don't think, in January because you're not going to play. You're looking at Sunderland and thinking, do you know what? If I get a chance and hit the ground running here, I could be Sunderland's main striker in the second half of the season. I could get them promoted. Well, that's a massive appeal for a young, Premier League forward, isn't it?
The interesting one with the loan market is, and Le Bris has touched on this, last week he said Chris Meffam is basically the model of signing that we'd like to sign, someone who can come in and make an instant impact. The problem you have in the January loan market is players who are often available on loan in January are available because they haven't played an awful lot of football in the first half of the season. So they're going to need a bit of time to get up to speed there. But then the other thing, Le Bris said, the other difficulty is you can't guarantee, unless you're bringing in, I don't know, someone off the top of my head, someone who's going to be an absolute game changer, like, say, Ahmad was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Unless you bring in someone in like that, you can't guarantee they're going to play week in, week out, which makes it difficult as well. Louis Barry is a name that's crept up a fair bit in recent weeks. He's obviously scored a load of goals at Stockport. Going back to Villa, he's going to go to the Championship. Borough were strongly linked, but aren't interested in signing him. He looks like he'll be a
well, he's going to be one, isn't he? The Championship clubs are going to be falling over, and I would think, because the thing with him is what makes him
left and up front, which
yeah, and also he's been playing regular football and scoring regular goals in the first half of the season for Stockport. Now I know the leap from Stockport to the top end of the Championship is a big one, but it's a smaller leap than if you've just been kicking about playing academy football at Premier League 2 level and you've never played a senior game and all of a sudden you're moving, which is, let's be honest, that's the market Sunderland have moved in the past, Mason Burstow, for example, and it just hasn't worked. I think the thing with Barry is, at least he's hardened to regular week in, week out competitive football. All right, not a Championship level, but it feels like he would potentially have the chance of being able to slot in straight away in a way that, a 19-year-old who's never played out of academy football, it feels like a much harder ask for someone like that.
2 to 3 players is what Le Bris has said on a few occasions, and he stressed it's quality we need, and there needs to be a connection. They need to fit in on and off the pitch. Just attack, then? Is it just attack that you think?
I don't think it's just attack. Do you? I mean, where else are we looking? Right back's been a bit of a thought all the way through. That if Trey Hume's out for a long period of time, yes, Luke O'Neill moves across, but then you're lightening things at centre half. I've always thought the ideal for Sunderland would be a versatile fullback who, in theory, could play on either flank. Now, again, that's a bit of a wish list, isn't it? There's not many of them about who can play at Championship level, but a utility defender probably feels like they could be useful.
And midfield as well, the kind of short. The problem you've got in midfield is in a month's time, you've got Rigg and Brown both back, and suddenly you're spoiled for choice in there. And Samed, who they're expecting to play in the game.
Yeah, and that's the same argument on the left, isn't it? That at the minute you could do with a left sider. But if Romain Mundle and Tommy Watson are both back in another 2, 3, 4 weeks' time, then your left side is going to struggle to get a kick between now and the end of the season. So I think in both of those positions, it's probably going to be driven a bit by just how serious these injury issues are. And the Mundle one in particular, we don't quite know, do we? He's kind of saying it's it's not imminent that he's back, and we need to take our time. And so I think a lot will depend on how bad Mundle and Watson's injuries are. When realistically are they going to be back? And then, like you say, in the middle of the park, how far away is Brown? And just what level does Le Bris think Samed is going to be able to come back at?
And in terms of exits, I guess the one major worry was played down this week or disappeared altogether when it was revealed that Bournemouth don't have a recall clause in Chris Meffam's loan. Losing Meffam would have been a major blow because he's established himself as arguably Le Bris's first choice centre half now. So keeping him for the year is going to be a major boost. There's no real feel at this point that Sunderland could be in any real serious risk of losing any of their key stars. Exits feels more like those around the fringes, doesn't it? Rusin, Barr. Le Bris said last week, Al-Shisha's future is still uncertain, despite the fact he's played a fair bit in recent weeks. It's those sorts of players, isn't it? Like Zach Johnson, could he go on loan? It's them types, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, are Sunderland going to be put in a position where they have to cash in or Rigg or Bellingham, say, this month? It feels incredibly unlikely. Because it doesn't feel like that kind of bid is imminent from any Premier League or European club straight away in January. And B, you know, as we've said, Sunderland are in a good, solid financial position. Christian Speakman said to us before the start of the season that, you know, there's no financial fair play worries. They don't have to sell to buy. There's no imperative for them to sell anyone. So you know, I think that, and you know, it doesn't feel like we're in a position with any of their players like we were in Jack Clarke, where for the best part of 18 months, if not that they'd been agitating for a move, then those around them had certainly been making the noises that they'd quite welcome the opportunity to try something else elsewhere. Doesn't feel like we're like that with any of your Riggs, your Bellinghams, your Ballards, your Neils, your Pattersons. So no, I don't think Sunderland will be in a vulnerable position with any of those. Roosin and Barr, if you can get shot of them this month, then that clearly happens. Whether there'll be takers for them, we'll have to see. There obviously wasn't in the summer. I think Burnett is in that position as well. You know, goodness knows what's happened with him. Al-Shish is a more interesting one because at the minute, as I said before, with Mundle and Watson out, he's having to play, isn't he? It wouldn't surprise me if they could move Al-Shish on. Maybe you then look to bring in another left-sider, because even when Watson and Mundle are fit, they then can be part of that mix. I think that's more difficult if Al-Shish is still there on the books, because as he's shown, he is still a squad member, and Le Bris is willing to turn to him. I actually thought he played all right last night.
Stoke as well. Fair play, regardless of what happens this month. Fair play to him for keeping his head down, I think. But yeah. It's clear that he wasn't the fancy of Le Bris, but he's kept his head down. He's done all right when he's been called upon. It'd have been easy to do the opposite, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You know, especially when you've got your manager pretty publicly saying, you know, this isn't really going to happen for you here. Well, yeah, fair play to him. You know, I don't think he's the long-term answer there by any stretch of the imagination. But at a time when Sunderland have needed that gap filling, he's stepped up to the plate. And yeah, you know, two performances that were absolutely fine, I thought.
Just finally then, before we wrap up, what's a successful, what's an extremely successful window for Sunderland? And what's the worst possible scenario within reason? Like, clearly the worst possible scenario is losing Rig, Bellingham.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not going to happen. What
the baseline level is holding on to it. If Sunderland exit the window without having added anyone and without having losing anyone, I don't think it's a disaster. It's clearly not a good window, but it's not a disaster. We've seen, you know, we're more than halfway through the season now. We've seen that this squad is definitely good enough to finish in the top six without any changes made to it, and with some players coming back from injury. So I don't think it's a disaster if nothing happens. Clearly, it's a disaster if a big name player leaves this month. I think what's a success is adding a striker who you feel is ready to play straight away and improve what is there at the moment. Now, that could mean an experienced player who's already in and around the Championship. It could mean a Premier League loanee, but someone who, you know, has some kind of background in senior football. It might be someone from abroad. But if it's going to be someone from abroad, it doesn't want to be a Milan Alexic who can't speak English and is going to need 3 months before they're anywhere near being ready to make any kind of an impact. You know, if Sunderland make that kind of signing and make it very clear that it's a signing for the future and it's someone who they've really liked and this is their opportunity to get him, fine. That's clearly the model they're going down. But it also does feel like you need someone for now, and that type of player is not going to fit that bill.
Especially when Le Bris has said exactly that.
Exactly.
On more than one occasion.
Yeah.
Well, let's wrap up there because it must be getting dark. I can just see myself, it's probably not a bad thing, but I can just see, for the viewers, I can just see myself disappearing here as we go. It seemed to just get darker and darker on my side. Yeah.
It was getting dark at the Stadium of Light last night when it started snowing. I tell you that. It was cold. It was the first one where it was like, it was a bit raw.
Was it? What was the game on the Saturday when the storm was there? Was it
Stoke?
Yes. Was it Stoke?
I think it was Stoke.
The Stoke game we all mulled in over Christmas. That was the coldest of the season for me, which is another. I mean, that Stoke game at a half-empty Stadium of Light's going to be chilly.
I think there's every. I was going to say, that cup game could be big. I think there's every chance it'll be cold. You're there on Sunday for Portsmouth. I think it'll be cold then.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to that. I'm the
Be good.
game rather than the temperature.
The shivering. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
plenty of new fleeces for Christmas, so I'll wrap up.
Exactly.
Well, thanks for watching.
We are Sunderland bubble hats. That's clearly what we need.
I've had a hat on all day today, to be fair, working at home.
Oh, well, there you go.
Proper northeasterner. Put the hat on rather than the heating.
Yeah.
I can't film in it. We will do some transfer Q&As over the course of this month, because obviously there's likely
we'll
to be
do a couple of lives, won't we? We'll flag it up. We'll do a couple of lives because they're always good fun.
Because there's likely to be a fair bit going on, even if it's just speculation for the early couple of weeks, clearly, and what is and isn't happening. So if there's anything you want us to discuss in those, just give us a shout. But we'll shout up on the socials when we're going to do something, just to give you a heads up in advance. As we said at the start, do subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Appreciate that. We're closing in on 1,000 subscribers, which would be great. Hopefully box that off early this year. Rate and review if you're listening on your podcast platforms. And another thanks to our partners, Cospex Opticians and the Fans Museum. Enjoy the game Sunday if you're there, and we'll be back early next week for another episode. We are Sunderland. Take care.